Unlock your potential with these free classroom resources. The knowledge you need is right here.
Hello, and welcome to our school classroom. I'm Ben Johnson, and today we're going to be talking about the layers of physical security, also known as defense in depth, or as I like to call it, the security onion. I like to call it security onion because when you pull back the layers, it's appealing. So that'll be my dad joke for today. Let's get started. So our first layer, as you saw in the video, there's the outer layer. That's outside of the property. That is going to be property that you don't control, but that you still want to make an attempt to, to monitor. And also, this is where you're going to start your initial signage to define ownership of your own property. Lighting is really important here. And then CPTED, the Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, which it will be a whole video on its own, which is going to help with that natural surveillance. So some of the things as we start to move in, we'll talk about our site perimeter. So this is everything that's outside the site perimeter. So your biggest things here that you're going to be able to do, because it's not area that you control, is going to be signage to show where your boundary starts, and then ideally some sort of surveillance, whether it be natural surveillance or even technology like cameras, thermal, things like that, that are going to detect people approaching. Just because someone's in an area outside of your property doesn't mean they can't be there. Certainly if you think about a school or a strip mall or a church where they have neighbors, right? It is perfectly acceptable for people to be in the neighboring property. They belong there. We just want to make sure that people are not coming through the neighboring property in an attempt to do harm to our own property or our own people. And that's where that site perimeter comes in. So we'll talk about the 5 Ds later, but they're deter, detect, delay, deny, and then depending on who you are, it's either defend or destroy or report, which isn't really a D, I get it, but we're not really good at making acronyms here. So this is going to be part of that delay and possibly even that deny, right? And definitely the deter. So we want to deter people with signage. We want to deter people with fencing, right? For a lot of people, that's going to be sufficient. It lets them know where the boundary starts. It lets them know what the expected behavior is. Problem solved. For people who still want to get in, who should not be in, hopefully we're going to be able to use that to delay them to get in. Some examples of our site perimeter are going to be our fence line. It might be vehicle barriers, might be gates, fencing, guarded entrances, perimeter detection. This is a big one. We can do it through analytics on cameras. We can do it through fiber optic cabling running through our fences. We can do it through LiDAR, through radar, through microwave technology. There's all sorts of things we can do to determine when someone has crossed that site perimeter, particularly in a case where they shouldn't. And that leads us to the middle layer. Some people talk about this, some people don't. I think the middle layer is hugely important. The middle layer is that area between your site perimeter and your building. So again, we talk about a school or even a lot of private buildings, private industry, commercial buildings are going to have some sort of area around their building. Their building is not going to be butted up to the site perimeter. And so the middle layer is where we have the opportunity to detect, to observe people coming through, to see what's going on. It also is a delay because they have to cross that layer. And we'll talk about in later videos about how we want to design a system so that whatever the minimum amount of time is it takes for a response from our security force, from the police, from whomever, that we create enough barriers with enough delay that a person who is able to defeat all of our barriers still, because of the delay, because of the time it takes, is not able to reach our asset. So again, this middle layer is usually going to be a parking lot, can be pedestrian pathways. This is also where our patrol routes are going to take place, especially for drones. So we may have some autonomous vehicle type drones, the ones that just run on four wheels, that report back data, report back thermal imaging, report back regular video imaging. They're going to be running around in this area. This is where our guard forces may be. And this is also where probably the most valuable asset in every security program is going to be, which is our people. This is the first opportunity for our people to notice that something isn't right. You say, hey, there's a car that's here that I don't recognize. There's a person who's here who shouldn't be here. Maybe there's a vehicle here that doesn't have a parking permit, right? It's the first opportunity to identify somebody who has come through the site perimeter and who should not be there. And that gets us to the building itself. So we have that building perimeter. And the building perimeter is going to consist of doors, windows, any kind of a portal. A lot of people think that building has four sides. And unless it's a dome or something, that's just not accurate. Every building that has corners has a minimum of 6 sides. Even if it's a rectangular building, there are 6 sides because you always have a floor and you always have a ceiling. And if you have a high enough value asset, people will try to use subterranean methods to get there. That just happened over the weekend in Europe, where somebody used tools, a drill, jackhammers, whatever, busted through the wall of a subterranean vault and got into almost every single lockbox that was inside a bank vault. And because of the holiday weekend, because everything's closed, they don't find out about it till a couple of days later. Subterranean is huge. They should have had all sorts of seismic sensors and cameras and all sorts of things to detect that, and they did not. And I suspect that bank is going to be in a whole lot of trouble with their insurance company and a whole lot of trouble with their patrons. Then you also have the roof. And if you think that an assailant won't attempt to come in through your roof, if you have a high enough value asset, they most certainly will. They will use a helicopter, they will use a drone, they will use whatever means they need to do to get into your roof, because that is often one of the least secure entry points. Almost every single commercial building has a roof hatch if they have a flat roof. That means that they can open that roof hatch so they can get in. How often do you see a commercial building, if you do any work in them, where the roof hatch isn't locked? That's huge. And even if it is locked, it's not like it's hard to bust those hinges. So later on in other videos, as we talk about improving our security, hardening our site, we will talk about making sure that we have sensors on those roof hatches. There's also just cases where I know someone who owns a jewelry store, and a person wanted to break into her vaulted area. It's a commercial building, sometimes called flex space. They just cut the roof. It's just a steel roof with a rubber membrane on top. They got saws and they cut the roof and they lowered themselves in. They got the stuff and they got out. And by the time the police got there from the alarm, because the alarm only went off when they went out the doors, guess what? They're already gone. All their assets are gone. There's ways that it could have been prevented too. But anyways, so I digress. Back to this layer, which is our building perimeter. And then we get inside. And so a typical office building probably has a lobby, right? And so your public is allowed through that side perimeter because they're supposed to be there. And they're allowed through that, through that middle area, if you will, because they're supposed to be there. And they're allowed through the building perimeter, through that front door, because they're supposed to be there. But that doesn't mean they're supposed to have access to the entire building. And so this is where your controlled areas come in. Likely the lobby maybe has a restroom, a water fountain, and, somebody to greet them. But outside of that, all the other spaces should be secured. There should be doors with card readers that are locked, staff-only corridors. Right, these are going to be your places that require a moderate amount of security, office suites, operations areas. maybe aren't high security. There's probably, there's going to be another layer between here and the asset, but this is just maybe to keep the honest people honest, if you will, right? It's just to keep people where they're supposed to be. A lot of times signage and locked doors are sufficient to keep people out because it defines what they're allowed to do. It creates that expected behavior. Inside our controlled areas, though, is going to be our restricted areas. This is where we protect our actual asset. So in the case of a bank, your controlled area might be the back office space, but your restricted area is going to be that vault because that vault is what holds your asset. It's going to be data centers, especially companies who have a heavy IT presence or a lot of valuable data. You think about, a KFC, right? The Colonel's chicken. That recipe is pretty valuable. Same thing with Coca-Cola. That data is going to be inside a data center that's going to be very heavily secured. HR and finance offices. Finance offices are kind of obvious. There's probably money there. HR, because a lot of times, if you have a disgruntled employee, they're going to target the HR person and let them go. So there's also a lot of personnel records. It's just another area that needs to be more secure. And then executive areas, because again, if someone's going to try to target a company, you think about the CEO from the healthcare company that was assassinated earlier last year. The executive area needs to be highly secured. And then R&D, of course, that goes back to that information protection. If you are a company that is building a new product, you certainly don't want just anybody, or probably most people, to be able to get in there and see it. And that brings us to our asset layer. So maybe the safe or vault fits in better here. It could also be that it's, if it's a data center, the asset layer is going to be the actual locks on the IT room cabinets, right? It could be anchoring your equipment, tying down a safe, all sorts of things, right? Tamper detection. We talked about seismic earlier, but this is that final layer of protection before you get to the actual asset itself. Certainly in locations that have more lenient security requirements, the asset layer may actually be the same as the restricted area. Maybe that you need to protect your data center, but not to the extent that you need to have access control on all of your cabinets. It may just be you need to protect your data center so somebody doesn't accidentally walk in there and unplug your internet router, right? So sometimes your restricted area and your asset layer may be the same. Sometimes your building perimeter and your site perimeter may be the same because they are, the building's butted up to the perimeter of the site. I highly recommend against that, but we can't control what somebody else has already built. And so with that, that's the end of my talk on the security onion, my favorite, but the defense in depth or the layered security. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, make a comment, or go to our website and send us a message.